Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. This is Chigo Alim from Sekolah Menengah Saidina Ali, and this is the video lesson for the topic of this week, which is topic 2.2, diversity and classification of organism. The purpose of this video is to help you understand the handout that is given for this week, which is the handout for topic 2.2, and also to help you understand what is written on your textbook. So, before we start this lesson, you need to prepare your textbook and also your notes that is given to you this week in front of you so that you can refer to them or you can read them while watching this video. All right, you have your textbook and notes ready. Before we start, I want to explain the two objectives for this lesson. So by the end of this lesson, you should be able to, objective number 1, classify plants and animals according to common observable characteristics. Objective number 2, recognize the existence of microorganisms such as bacteria, viruses, and fungi. So for objective number 1, basically, in this lesson, we are going to teach you about how plants are classified. In other words, how plants are grouped according to its type. And also, you are going to learn about how microorganisms are classified. So as you can see here, microorganisms are classified to 3 different types or 3 different classes: bacteria, viruses, and fungi. So those are the 2 lesson objectives. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim, we will start. We will talk about plants first. Now there are a lot of different types of plants, so in order to help identify plants better and make sure everything is organized, we classify plants into 2 different types. Or in other words, we split the plants, we divide the plants into 2 groups. Now, group number 1 are plants that can reproduce by seeds, and group number 2 are plants that do not reproduce by seeds. So the plants that can reproduce by seeds are divided into 2 more groups. So these are flowering plants and no flowering plants. So that means flowering plants means tumbuh-tumbuhan yang ada bunga, and non-flowering plants means tumbuh-tumbuhan yang nada bunga. An example of a flowering plant is the hibiscus plant, and also an example of the non-flowering plant is the pine tree. Plants that do not reproduce by seeds are also divided into 2 groups. So these are the 2 groups, algae and ferns. An example of a plant that is in the algae group is the seaweed, and an example of a plant that is in the ferns group that is the bird nest fern. Okay, so this is how plants are categorized or how plants are classified according to their group and according to their characteristics. So we will talk about the characteristics of each type of group, the flowering plants, the non-flowering plants, algae, and ferns in the next slide. So in the slide, you can see 2 types of flowering plants. These are plants that can grow flowers. So the first example is the hibiscus plant. The second example is the sunflower plant. Any plant that can produce a flower falls into this category. So what are the characteristics of flowering plants? The first characteristic is that flowering plants, they have roots, stems, and leaves. So roots, stems, and leaves are present. For flowering plants, they can produce seeds that can be found in their fruits. Next, non-flowering plants. Next, we are going to talk about the other type of plants that produce seeds, which is the non-flowering plants. The non-flowering plants, they have roots, stems, and leaves. They also have leaves that are needle-like. So in other words, the leaves are very pointy. I will show you a picture after this, what that looks like. And The seeds for these types of plants can be found in the cone. So in this example, you have the pine tree and you have the pine cone growing on the pine tree, and you can often find seeds inside the cone. These are what the leaves look like for non-flowering plants. So they have needle-like leaves, and as you can see, the leaves can be very pointy. The third group for plants is algae. For algae, they don't have roots or stems or even leaves, right? So these things are not present. For algae, they can reproduce by giving out spores. So I'll show you later what the spores look like. So algae, they do not have seeds, just like the two previous groups of plants. Algae, they can only reproduce or they can only make new plants by giving out spores, and then the spores will grow into a new plant. So as I mentioned before, seaweed is a type of algae. These are what spores look like. So spores are different than seeds, but for algae and fern, they need spores in order to reproduce. That means they need to use spores instead of seeds in order to produce new plants. So this is what they look like. The fourth type of plant is called the fern, and an example of the fern is the bird's nest fern. Ferns, they have roots or stems or leaves. And just like algae, ferns can reproduce by giving out spores. And as you can see in this picture, the fern spores can be found on the leaves of the fern. So as you learned last week, there are a lot of different kinds of organisms, and we divide organisms into three different classes or three different groups: animals, plants, and microorganisms. You learned about animals last week or during the school holiday. For this week, we learned about plant, which is what we did just now. And now we will learn about the last type of organism, which is microorganism. Microorganisms are very small living organisms which can be seen under a microscope. So the word micro in microorganism means small. So micro means small, microorganism means small organism. And you can see here in this chart how microorganisms are classified. So they are classified into three groups: bacteria, virus, and fungi. Next, I will explain to you each type of microorganisms and their characteristics. First, we will talk about bacteria. There are a lot of different kinds of bacteria. On this slide, you can see two examples of bacteria: the lactobacillus bacteria and also the Mycobacterium tuberculosis bacteria. Bacteria is visible under a light microscope. That means they can be seen under a light microscope. A bacteria is larger than a virus. Although all these microorganisms are small, but some of them are slightly bigger than others. A bacteria is larger than a virus. A bacteria can be useful or harmful. Yogurt is made from useful bacteria, and you can even find bacteria in your stomach in order to help digest your food. Tuberculosis, or TB for short, is caused by a harmful bacteria. So some bacteria can give you diseases like tuberculosis. Next is the virus. So you probably have heard of this word before. So what is a virus? A virus is only visible under an electron microscope. That means it can only be seen using a very special type of microscope, which is called an electron microscope. The virus is the smallest living organism. So in other words, compared to a bacteria, the virus is smaller. And as you know, the virus can cause disease. For example, right now, we have a disease that's called COVID-19, and that is caused by a virus. And the common flu is also caused by a virus. And that virus is called the influenza virus. And finally, the fungi. The fungi have no roots, stems, or leaves, and fungi can be useful or harmful. So you can see here on this slide, we have two examples of fungi, the Penicillium notatum and the ringworm fungi. You can use the Penicillium notatum to produce medicine such as this antibiotic medicine. So it's very useful. Whereas the ringworm fungi is very harmful as it can give you a disease called the ringworm disease. So, to summarize, like I said in the beginning of this lesson, you should be able to classify plants according to their common observable characteristics. So, how are plants classified? So, plants are classified into two groups, plants that reproduce by seeds and plants that do not reproduce by seeds. Plants that can reproduce by seeds are divided into flowering plants and non-flowering plants, whereas the plants that do not reproduce by seeds are divided into algae and fern. Next, you should be able to recognize the existence of microorganisms such as bacteria, viruses, and fungi. So as you can see, microorganisms, they are divided into three different types: bacteria, virus, and fungi. That is the end of the lesson. We will stop there for now. I hope that was clear to you. If you have any questions, feel free to contact your science teachers. And until then, thank you for watching. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.